Okay, let's just dive right into it. The book of Revelation. It's filled with some of the most dramatic and, let's be honest, pretty confusing imagery in the entire Bible. And chapter 14 is definitely no exception. I mean, we've got angels flying around, a lamb on a mountain, and two really intense, really different harvests. It can feel kind of random, but it's actually a super carefully structured look at the ultimate end of two very different paths. So today, we're going to break down Revelation 14 and see how all these wild pieces actually fit together.
So, the previous chapters, 12 and 13, they set up this absolutely epic spiritual conflict. You've got Satan, the dragon, and his two beasts, which are really a corrupt empire and its propaganda machine, waging war on God's people. The stage is set, the lines are drawn. So, chapter 14 is the answer to the big question. What's the final outcome for each side? What happens to the people who endure, and what happens to the ones who compromise?
All right, the first thing you have to get to understand this chapter is that it's not a chronological story. It doesn't happen in order, like A, then B, then C. Instead, think of it as a series of visions that switch back and forth. As our source for this explainer, Dr. Dave Mathewson, points out, the author John keeps showing us two final destinies. First, the salvation and victory of the faithful, and then the judgment of those who sided with the beast. And here is that central contrast, laid out plain and simple. On one side, you have the Lamb's followers. They're identified by God's name on their foreheads, which is a symbol of divine ownership and protection. Their story? It ends in victory on Mount Zion. But on the other side, you've got the beast's followers. They've taken his mark, symbolizing their allegiance to the corrupt system that John calls Babylon, which was basically code for the Roman Empire. Their path leads to a certain and very severe judgment. It's really a tale of two allegiances, two marks, and two very, very different endings.
So let's start with the good news, right? The first destiny, victory on Mount Zion. This is a vision of pure hope, showing the reward for those who resisted all the pressure, who refused to compromise with the state-enforced idolatry, and who faithfully followed the Lamb.
This brings us to one of Revelation's most famous numbers, the 144,000. Now, this is not a literal head count. It's a symbolic number. It represents the complete people of God from every nation, tribe, and language. They're shown as this victorious army, but their victory doesn't come from swords. It comes through suffering and faithful witness. And their purity isn't about, literal celibacy. It's about refusing to be corrupted by the idolatry of the Roman Empire. This kind of symbolic language was a really powerful tool for a persecuted community, letting them talk about their reality in a coded, powerful way.
And this quote gets right to the heart of what defines this group. Dr. Mathewson actually calls this one of the most important themes in the entire book. Following the Lamb wherever he goes means total, uncompromising faithfulness. It means refusing to conform to a corrupt world, even if that path leads, just like it did for Jesus, straight to suffering and even death.
The setting for this victory is also deeply symbolic. Mount Zion isn't just a place on a map. In the Old Testament, it's the spot of God's presence and his rule. It's a symbol of ultimate security, protection, and salvation. So seeing the 144,000 standing there with the Lamb isn't just a nice image. It's a huge declaration that even though they might look defeated on earth, their ultimate destiny is totally secure in God's victorious presence.
Okay, so after that incredible vision of victory, the scene just shifts dramatically. We get the other side of the story, the destiny of the beast's empire and everyone who aligned with it. And this is delivered by a sequence of 3 angels, and their message is basically an escalating warning.
The key here is the progression. Angel number 1 offers one last chance with the eternal gospel. It's a universal call for all of humanity to just reorient their lives and worship the Creator, not the systems of power. But for those who refuse, well, the consequences are laid bare. The second angel announces the fall of the whole corrupt system, Babylon, aka Rome. And finally, the third angel brings it right down to the individual level, warning that anyone who identifies with that system is going to face God's judgment directly.
John's vision has this powerful kind of poetic justice to it. Using this metaphor of 2 wines, the empire, Babylon, is condemned because it made all the nations drunk on the intoxicating wine of its power and its wealth and its idolatry. So the punishment perfectly fits the crime. Those who got drunk on Babylon's wine now have to drink the undiluted, full-strength wine of God's fury.
And just when you think the visions might be over, John gives us another set of images to describe the exact same 2 destinies. This isn't a new sequence of events. It's a powerful agricultural metaphor,
And it's meant to drive the point home: the final harvest of all humanity.
The first harvest is a good one. Someone like a son of man, which is a clear reference to Jesus, swings a sickle and reaps a ripe grain harvest. This connects back to that idea of the 144,000 being the first fruits for God. So this is an image of salvation, gathering the wheat into the heavenly barn for their eternal reward.
But then the imagery takes a really dark and violent turn. The second harvest is of grapes. An angel gathers them up and throws them into the great winepress of God's wrath. This is a stark, common Old Testament image for divine judgment. The grapes aren't carefully collected. They are trampled, and the result isn't wine, but a river of blood.
And the scale of this judgment is meant to be just overwhelming. The blood is said to flow for 1,600 stadia. That's roughly 180 miles, and it's as high as a horse's bridle. Again, this isn't a literal measurement. This is symbolic apocalyptic language. It's meant to convey the absolute, total, and terrifying severity of the final judgment on evil in a way that would be unmistakable to its original audience.
So, after all of this incredibly intense imagery, victorious saints, falling empires, bloody harvests, what's the takeaway? I mean, why did John write all this? The answer really lies in the practical purpose these visions served for their very first audience.
This verse, right here, placed right in the middle of the chapter, it reveals the ultimate point. These visions of future victory and judgment were meant to be a powerful motivation. For Christians who were facing persecution and the temptation to just conform to the Roman system, this was a reminder: endure, be patient. Your faithfulness is seen, and God will ultimately bring justice. Don't compromise, because the end of that road is disaster.
And that leaves us with a final, really powerful question. Revelation 14 gives its readers a sneak peek at the final chapter. It assures them that no matter what it looks like right now, faithfulness leads to victory, and evil will be judged. And that raises the question for anyone, in any time. If you are convinced you know how the story ends, how does that conviction change the way you live your life right now, in the messy, complicated middle of it all?